Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to True Crime Groove. I'm your host, Maze. Thanks for listening. With me today on the podcast is the Pineapple Queen. How are you doing today, Pineapple Queen?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Maze?
I'm well. I'm a little frazzled. I'm taken back a bit. We had the podcast come out a few days ago, and I figured we would get our normal 500, 600, 700 views over a couple of weeks, and maybe some discussion about the podcast. Yeah, we did like 450 views in 2 days.
Yeah.
So we had to put our feet on the gas and go ahead and get the second part recorded. The weird thing is, the podcast is fine. We're telling the story. We haven't even barely gotten into the good stuff yet.
I know, it's crazy. It really is. And we're like so thankful. And thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for loving our podcast and listening to it. And, our subscribers, thank you guys for tuning in every week. We really, really appreciate it. And we're loving the feedback. And we're so excited to dig into this case because this is the one. You guys are going to your minds are going to be blown.
And here's the thing, because I sent out a couple of tweets to get some views for the podcast, and I had one tweet that got a bunch of responses, and the most common response is, well, I'll listen to your podcast, but F that POS, he did it, he's guilty, I hate him, basically.
Right, yeah.
And I'm like, that's fine. You can hate Scott Peterson. You can even think that he is guilty as sin. Just listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
And then we can go from there.
Right. Yeah.
So basically.
That's great.
Yeah. So basically, on the last podcast, we have Scott and Lacey. They're getting ready for a dinner with her parents. She goes missing. They're really suspicious of Scott. They don't really look anywhere else but at Scott. Eventually, the bodies are found. Connor and Lacey's bodies are found in the bay where he was fishing. And they arrest Scott. We went over a little bit about how the media really didn't like Scott. He did himself no favors. I concur with that completely. Like, the guy's not a likable guy. I get it. But they hammer him. They hammer him for having dyed hair. And we explained, like, he had his hair dyed for a long time because the guy couldn't even walk in a grocery store and not get screamed at before, so he was in disguise. The cops knew he was in disguise. He didn't do, but anyways. So basically, he gets arrested. He hires Mark Garagos, one of the best defense attorneys in the country, $1 million. They hire him, and we're about to go into jury selection and the craziness that goes on with that. And so without further ado, let's get our groove on and talk some true crime. This is the case of Scott Peterson, part 2. So we start part 2 with jury selection. They have well, first of all, they moved the trial 50 miles north of Modesto. Okay, they may as well have moved it 5 miles north. I mean, and to the defense of that, they could have moved it 500 miles. I'm not sure it would have made any difference at all. But they move it up north 50 miles, and they have a jury questionnaire. People that are going to be on the jury, they send out these questionnaires, and they don't even bother at this point to ask the question, have you heard of this case? Like, that's not even an option. The best they can do is say, do you think you could give Scott Peterson a fair trial? That's like the main question. But there's other questions on it. Have you ever been involved in a legal action, this, that, the other. So there's all kinds of questions on this thing, but that's the main one. And that's basically what they have to choose from. And they know for a fact that 50% of the people filling out this form think Scott Peterson's guilty already without any evidence being presented or anything. 50% of the pool is cut out. questioning these jurors, and then they know they have people that are trying to get on this jury to convict Scott Peterson. They know this for a fact. I think Garagos defines them as stealth jurors. It's basically jurors answering questions the way they think they should be answered, but in fact, they don't feel that way. Like, so they're giving them all the right answers, and there's a guy who calls or emails Mark Garagos and says, that woman that you sent on to the second round of questioning, she's laughing at you on these discussion boards, these chat groups. She's laughing at how stupid you are because you believe her, because she wants to get on that jury to convict Scott Peterson. That's her whole goal in life, basically. She's the juror Nancy Grace. So they knew this for a fact. So could they even get a fair jury? I'm not sure. I have my doubts. But they do finally pick a jury. Another thing about this jury, once they select the jury, they're not sequestered, meaning, sometimes you have a case that's a big case and they'll sequester the jury, which that they control, like what you can read, what you can watch, what you can talk about, blah, blah, blah. And they put them up in a hotel and all this, blah, blah, blah. Well, they didn't do that for this jury. This jury was put on the honor system. Okay, that's great. I'm not sure how effective that actually is, though. And then I guess the case starts. The prosecution, they present their theory of the case, and it is that the night of December 23rd, Scott comes home. He's so in love with Amber Frye, I guess, the woman he's known for 34 days and has met 4 times, that he decides he doesn't want to be a father or married to Lacey anymore, even though Amber has a kid already. And he kills her that night, cleans up the crime scene because they never found a single, even a tiny bit of evidence that a crime was committed in the house or in the vehicle or in the storage facility. I guess he strangles her because that's about the only way you might not have any evidence. He strangles her. He puts her in his truck. And then the next day he goes to the warehouse to get the boat that they say Lacey doesn't know about. He goes into the office, into the storage facility. He has a computer in there because he's a fertilizer salesman. So I guess he had supplies there and things there, whatever. He's going through some emails. He's Googling how to do this woodworking project or something. So, he's just kicking it with his dead wife in the truck, and he's just kicking it, surfing the web, doing as you would typically do after you murdered your wife. You got to get on there and check out your emails. So then he drives out to the Berkeley Marina, puts her in the boat. Nobody sees. This is in broad daylight, mind you, and there's people that live on their boats in this marina. So there's people everywhere, people looking out their windows, whatever. He just rolls this 150-pound pregnant woman, into a boat with a tarp around her and 5 concrete anchors and drives out to the middle of the bay. That's their theory. Garagos comes in with his opening statement and he obliterates them. He says, because they bring up the fact that they're saying Scott lied about what happened that morning. He wheels in a TV, and if you remember, he said they were watching Martha Stewart and they were talking about meringue and blah, blah, blah. So I guess nobody from the prosecution even gave it a chance to check this thing. He wheels in the TV and turns on the episode from the December 24th, and there Martha Stewart is talking about making a meringue. Not only that, the prosecution, they call this computer witness, this computer expert guy, and he's supposed to be a prosecution witness, but he ends up being a bigger witness for the defense because he says, well, at like 8 o'clock in the morning, roughly, someone is searching for sunflower umbrella stands and clothes, women's clothes. I mean, unless Scott Peterson is a genius, a criminal mastermind, mind you, he's a criminal mastermind that put the bodies right where he said he was. So he's that big of a criminal mastermind. But this criminal mastermind was looking at stuff on the internet pretending to be Lacey, or she was alive. She was alive at 8 a.m. It's one of the two. And I think we're going to figure out pretty quickly which one of the two it is. Garagos, in this opening statement, he obliterates the prosecution. It makes them look like fools. It doesn't go well for them, and then they start calling witnesses. The prosecution start calling witnesses. Like I said, with that computer expert, they call him, and he kind of gets obliterated. They show how they took over 100 items from the house. They didn't find any evidence of foul play on any of those. They searched the house, the storage facility, the car, their vehicles, the boat, everything. They don't find a single shred of evidence of anything. So
I think we forgot to mention in the first podcast, he did cut his hand when he was pulling tools out of his truck. And the only evidence that they did find in his car was his own blood in his truck. And when he went in for the police interrogation or interview or whatever you want to call that, they asked him, how'd you cut your hand? And he said, well, I was moving tools from my truck to my storage unit and I sliced my hand open. I mean, so that's really all that they had when it came to like DNA and blood-wise and all that. Like there was no...
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is rumor. That like the press is reporting that when the cops went into the house, they smelled bleach. That's not true. They also mentioned that there was vomit cleaned up by the pool. That's not true. So the press is relentlessly reporting facts that are simply not true.
Right. And like, I think they also mentioned like, why would Lacey need to clean her, like mop her kitchen floor when they just had a cleaning lady there the day before? And it's like, okay, well, again, like Lacey took pride in her home. And if she was going to have people over the next day after, for Christmas morning, I'm sure she wanted to make sure it was nice and clean so she wouldn't have to do it after her dinner from her parents' house. She could just go home, go to bed, and, it'll be ready for the next day.
Right. And the thing I think you have to focus on, especially with this computer search that she was doing, is if Scott masterminded this computer search, he doesn't bring it up. The computer guy's the guy who found it. The prosecution witness is the guy who found the searches. Scott never said, well, she was on the computer. Go look, check it out. He never said that because he didn't know. He was still in bed. He didn't even know that. Also, when it comes to the early success of the defense, they call Detective Brocchini to the stand. And Garagos pretty much annihilates this cop. He gets him to admit that there's no evidence, physical evidence at all, that Scott committed this crime. He gets him to admit that he didn't really look at anybody else but Scott. He gets him to admit that he lied. He lied by omission. He put in a report of his, there was a thing that said there was a woman that worked at the storage facility across the street from the storage facility or whatever. She had seen Lacey sitting in the boat because remember, Lacey didn't know anything about the boat. It was a total secret. Well, she had seen Lacey sitting in the boat and she came over to her into her office and asked if she could use the bathroom. And she said, sure, whatever. But she said it was her. And he left that out of a report that he wrote. So this guy, he was a scumbag. So that's just another thing that wasn't going well for the prosecution at first. I think we mentioned the cement anchors before, that they show pictures to the jury that says there's proof of evidence that he made 5 anchors. I've seen those pictures. I urge anyone who is listening to this to go look, just Google Scott Peterson anchors or something, anchor evidence or whatever, something like that, and they'll pop up, I'm sure. I've seen them. No. It looks like dust on a floor.
I was going to say, too, the anchors themselves are not very big. I did post you. I'll put a picture here for you of one of the anchors that they do have.
They're 8 pounds each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, I don't know.
Well, them saying that he made 5 anchors, the proof that he made 5 anchors, when I looked at it objectively and said, is that proof that there were 5 anchors? I didn't see it. I saw cement dust on a floor of a garage, basically.
Right.
He said, I made one anchor for my boat. And they said, well, what'd you do with the rest of the concrete? And he said, I dumped it in a hole by my driveway. And like I said before, Nancy and that guy went out there, and there it is. It was like busted up little pebbles of concrete in a hole in his driveway. And you're like, Nancy just said, and walked away and never talked about it ever again after she hammered it and hammered it and hammered it. It's ridiculous. So basically, the prosecution is getting creamed at this point. Then they call Amber Frye to the stand, and everything just kind of changes after that, because they hear that Scott was an adulterer, but especially because they hear those tapes. She had recorded him while he was on vacation or whatever in Europe, where actually he was just looking for Lacey at rallies and vigils but she's taping him because she already knows now that who he is. And those are so damning. One of the attorneys for Scott Peterson, he read the transcripts of what was said, and he says, it's kind of bad, but we should be okay. Then he listens to the tapes and he says, we're screwed. He tells Garagos, we're screwed. But the thing is about those tapes, he and they have hours of tapes. And the thing is, Scott Peterson is a jerk. He's a scumbag. He's a cheater. He's a liar. He's maybe even has a sex addiction. It's possible. Like you mentioned before in part 1. I don't know. But he never incriminates himself on those tapes. Not one time does he say anything. And I haven't listened to every single second of those tapes. They are part of the docuseries on A&E. And I did notice that one time, because I watched it over and over and over again, just to listen to what he's saying, just to hear how his voice sounds, all of it. He says was, something like that, like she was my wife. He refers to her in the past tense. And people will say, well, that's pretty guilty if you're referring to people in the past tense. And I would say, yeah, that's true. But it's not proof.
Yeah, I mean, referring to people in the past tense isn't, if you're going to try and sit there and say that you weren't involved, how do you know? And depending on when that conversation came about, was it earlier, right at the beginning, or was it later on, months later, before, Amber came out and all of that? I don't know. But the other thing I was going to say too is that, she's asking him, she's trying to get him to say, well, things have just been rough and I just couldn't take it anymore, blah, 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 I killed her, whatever. She's trying to get something like that out. And he's over there like, I can't talk to you about any more of this. Like, I don't, we've got to wait and see when she finally does.
I was just going to say, absolutely. That's.
So you're thinking to yourself, what can't you tell Amber until all this is blown over? Like, what, Well,
I think even the simple fact that he kept the relationship going while his wife was missing, that's pretty suspicious. And it's hard to fault people thinking he's guilty just from that. But that's not evidence. Yeah. That's just how you feel.
Right, exactly.
And feelings don't necessarily count in a murder trial with the death penalty.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So Amber's testify is damning. It's crushing. At around this same time, one of the jurors, juror number 5, named Justin Falconer, he gets dismissed from the jury. And he gets dismissed because people tell the judge, there's somebody telling the judge that he's talking about the case during like meals and things like that. And he disputes that. He did several interviews and he said that he didn't talk about the case. And what I kind of got from it is he was tossing out little, like he would say something like, Oh, the prosecution didn't have a good day today, did they? Like to the other jurors, like not necessarily talking about the case, but just the overall performance of like the prosecution day to day. He would be like, that's kind of minutia. That's what they didn't really prove much today, did they? And so they attacked him. The rest of the jurors kind of went after him and said, no, we got to get rid of this guy. He's too pro defense. And you can kind of see that because this isn't the only time that something like that happens. So Garagos at this time, he's looking for anything he can. He buys a small fishing boat. He gets a 150-pound weight. It's to simulate a dead body. He ties these 5 anchors to this weight, and he goes out into the bay, and they're filming it. And the guy in the boat is supposed to dump this weight into the water. And he attempts it 4 times, and the boat sinks 3 times, and it capsizes another time, the 4th time. So he can't do it, basically. And Garagos wants to present this as evidence, and the judge says no. You can't bring that in. I can kind of understand why the judge says no, because it's a defense test. It's a test from the defense, and it wasn't controlled. It was just them doing it themselves. There's no... But I could see another part where the prosecution could go and try to do it as well and see if they can film it and get this thing to go into the bay without the boat sinking or capsizing. I could kind of see that, especially since the judge let the people go to the marina and sit in the boat. They got to go look and see the boat. They were like rocking it back and forth. So they kind of understood what was going on here. Like, but it was on land. It wasn't on the water. So it's totally different. What the reaction of the boat is completely different.
Yeah, and I'll put a picture up for you guys too, so you know what kind of boat we're talking about. I think I did in part 1, but it's not a very big boat. It's kind of like a metal, bigger than a canoe, but not a speedboat, kind of.
No, it's got one of the little
motors on the
motors,
back.
That you control with your hand or whatever. And
yeah,
it's not a big boat at all. It's a small boat. But so he's not allowed to do that. So the next thing that happens is this scent dog, right? And to this day, some of those jurors still talk about the scent dog, and that being one of the reasons why they convicted Scott Peterson. But it has since come out that this scent dog, Tremble, was terrible at its job. It failed its certification. It was wrong 75% of the time. And then you have experts, and I tend to believe this, that scent dog hit on a scent of Lacey on the dock of the marina. She never set foot on that dock. How does a scent dog hit on a scent that's never there? It's impossible. You can't do that. And experts and even dog people since have said, what that person testified to is ridiculous. There's no way it could have happened that way, that the dog would pick up her scent simply from being moved from the back of a truck into a boat and never having set foot on that dock. There's no way that dog could smell her scent on the dock. But it's allowed. They present it, and the judge says, fine, that's good. Then comes, because as you remember, when Lacey was found, she only the torso of her was found, and no internal organs were found. The baby was not there. And so they call in this expert, I'm using the air quotes, expert, that says the reason why you found Lacey the way you did is because of tidal actions, meaning the way the ocean was stirring and spinning, it cut the arms and legs off and the head because of the weights, and the torso floated to the surface. And now, since then, they've tested this. They've talked to oceanographers and all the kind. They're like, that's not how that works. Bodies don't do that. We've seen bodies that were submerged in water just like this for years. A rope doesn't cut through tendons and bones. Bones don't disintegrate. So if anything, even if the it started cutting through the flesh, it would still hit the bone and it wouldn't go anywhere. It would stay submerged. So this title expert that they called it's ridiculous. It's complete nonsense. Garagos makes up his second mistake, I would call it, when he calls this doctor, and the doctor is supposed to be testifying to the body and how it's found and blah, blah, blah. And when on cross-examination, he starts getting flummoxed and he starts getting upset. And eventually he like screams out or yells out, "Give me a break, cut me a break," or something like that. And at that point, all your credibility is shot. You have none. And so this defense witness is just a complete nightmare. It's terrible. He then makes a third mistake. There's eyewitnesses to this case that say they saw Lacey walking the dog at various times after 10:18, which 10:18 is the time that the neighbor says she put Mackenzie back in the yard. He has like 5 witnesses that he has ready to call. They're like in the witness room, but he doesn't. His explanation for not calling them is that because of the neighbor putting Mackenzie back in the yard at 10:18, he thinks he's already proven that Lacey was alive on the 24th. And since the prosecution said she was killed the day before, he thinks the fact that they know now that she was alive on the 24th, that the prosecution's case has been shot to hell. So that's why he doesn't call these witnesses. I think in hindsight, that was a big mistake. And we'll get into why it was even a bigger mistake than what it seems right now. They get into closing arguments. The prosecution's closing argument is all emotion, very little facts. It's mostly, here's Scott Peterson. He's a giant douchebag, and he killed his wife. He was fishing right where his wife was found, so obviously he did it, and that's pretty much it. Garagos's defense closing argument, it was described as lackluster. It wasn't one of his best, and this is a world-class attorney that we're talking about. So for him to have a bad day that day and not give a really good closing argument, yeah, I mean, it happens. It happens, and just what you got to go with. So now the jury has the case. We're into deliberation. They take like a straw poll, and it's 10-2, guilty to not guilty, 10 guilties and 2 not guilties. They start developing a process of, okay, they're going to go through all the evidence. They hit a little bit of a hiccup. I don't have the name, but it's juror number 7. Her replacement is a woman called Rochelle Nice. And at the time, her hair was neon pink. And so they were calling her Strawberry Shortcake. And the reason that Rochelle Nice is even put on this jury is because juror number 7, there's a woman, during the deliberations, they were talking about something in the jury room while they were deliberating the case, and she went and independently researched it on her own. Like, she used the internet to look up to see if it was true, and you're not allowed to do that. So once she did that, she kind of was disqualified for being a juror, and they put Rochelle Nice in. She became the new juror number 7. And that's going to be important because she's very involved in this case. She comes in, first of all, she's adamant that Scott's guilty. She says, let's get this done. Why are we still talking about this? Well, the foreman at the time, Gregory Jackson, he's like, look, we started a process. We're going to have to start over, but we have a process that we're going over everything to make sure we've looked at everything. And so they start deliberating again, and the jurors are getting frustrated. The vast majority of the jurors are getting frustrated because they think he's guilty. They don't really want to look at any more evidence. They've made up their minds. But this Jackson, he's a lawyer and a doctor, I believe. And he wants to look at all the evidence. He wants to look at it all and say, are we making the right decision? In the docuseries, John Guinasso, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he's juror number 8. Because Gregory Jackson claims that this Guinasso guy is threatening him. And Guinasso says, I never threatened the guy. So they're, one saying he did, the other one saying he didn't. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because Gregory Jackson, who was deemed to be more pro-innocent than guilty, and I think Garagos even said at one point, I'm hoping for like a hung jury. Like he didn't think he could get and that's why I said it was his second mistake. His first mistake, in my opinion, was he told the media, I'm not only going to prove that Scott is not guilty, I'm going to prove he's stone cold innocent. And he never really did. And so having said that, that's a lot to put on yourself, saying, I'm going to prove a person's innocence as opposed to just that there's not enough evidence to convict them of their guilt. So I wouldn't have done that. And like I said, I would still use Mark Geragos if I needed him. If I needed a defense attorney, that's the first one I would want. But I think that was actually a mistake. But anyway, so this Gregory guy who was pro-innocent, he gets replaced by a new foreman. And that's kind of a defense nightmare scenario. They pick a new foreman, they put a new person on the jury, and what happens is Mark Garrett, like people left for the weekend and stuff because they figure there's no way they're going to come up with a verdict. This happened late on a Thursday, and they're thinking, well, they're going to have to start over. So people take off. Even Garagos takes off. He goes back to LA and all this other stuff, and they have a verdict by like 10 o'clock the next morning that they're coming back. And so Garagos wasn't even there when the verdict was read. He was still in Los Angeles. And some of Scott's family weren't there because they had gone home for what they figured was going to be the weekend and all that. So it comes back and they find him guilty. The initial reaction was, I would best describe it as, and you saw the docuseries, so I want to know what you think, but I thought it was disgusting the way the people reacted to this verdict. To me, there's no winners even if Scott Peterson is 100% guilty. Why are you cheering this? Like, why are you acting like you just won the Super Bowl? His life's ruined. He's ruined the life of 2 other people. Their families' lives are ruined. Everybody's life is ruined, regardless of whether you think he's guilty or not. Why are you celebrating like this? And I can only describe it. You'd have to watch the docuseries to see the way the people reacted. It just was abhorrent, terrible. What do you think?
I mean, I know I've told you this. I honestly feel like when they decided to do the trial for Scott Peterson, it was kind of like way back when a judge wasn't even a thing. They were like, put his head on a pike. They wanted to see him stuck to that stake and burn him alive. And when the jury finally announced that he was guilty and the way these people reacted, it was like they were dancing around the fire.
Yeah, like I said, it's disturbing. Regardless of what side of the fence you're on, it's disturbing to see people celebrating misery. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so this is the one phase of the trial. There's a little bit of a gap between the guilt innocent phase and the penalty phase, deciding whether or not he's going to get the death penalty. During this time, there's a woman named Paula Canny. She's an attorney that's been giving her opinions about the case and this and that. And her neighbor comes to her and says, I got something to tell you. And the jurors are drinking in this bar. And she's like, they're not talking about the case, are they? And she's like, yeah, they are. And so she's an officer of the court. She's a lawyer. So she has to disclose to the judge that people are reporting to her that the jurors are talking about the case. In specifically that John Guinasso, the same one that was supposedly threatening Gregory Jackson, he is talking about the case. He's talking about book deals and this and that. And we're going to fry Scott Peterson. We got him, that kind of thing. And so she reports it to the judge. The judge, he looks at all the evidence. They subpoena the bartender, but he won't testify. He invokes his Fifth Amendment right, so he won't testify. And the judge ends up letting Guanasso stay on the jury. We go back a little bit to Justin Faulconer, who got removed from the jury. They said for talking to, I think it was Lacey's brother, Brent. And he said they were going into the courtroom and they had to go through the metal detectors, and he was in front of him or something, and there was cameras. And all he said to Brent was, because they were told, like, you can say hi, you can wave or whatever to the families and stuff. All he said was, I guess you're not going to be on the news today. I'm in your shot. I'm blocking your shot. And he was gone. They got rid of him for saying that. But this other guy who's talking about book deals and frying Scott Peterson, he gets to stay. That sounds fair to me, right?
And wasn't he like one of the ones who was in favor for the defense too? So,
well, Faulconer was more pro-defense, and he got tossed. Guanasso is one of the people that had already found him guilty, and he gets to stay.
So that seems real fair.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. That sounds fair to me.
Yeah.
So they do find him guilty, and they do find that the death penalty is warranted. Like I said, the reaction from the crowd when he was found guilty is kind of paralleled here with the jury members. I was a little disturbed by how satisfied they were that they put Scott Peterson to death. Mike Bellimasari, he was pretty pleased with himself for having given Scott Peterson the death penalty. Strawberry Shortcake was pretty pleased with herself, and they mocked him. They said stuff like, I guess one of the reasons why he was guilty was because he ordered the Playboy channel. This harkens back to your sex addiction theory that he had ordered the Playboy channel like 3-4 weeks after Lacey had gone missing. And people knew that was something Lacey would not approve of. And so that was proof that he knew she wasn't coming back, basically. And they made fun of him, and they said something like, do you miss your Dish Network subscription yet? Or something like that. So it's a little disturbing, but it is what it is. At the time, everybody just seemed to be like, well, he did it. No, because nobody really watched the trial. The trial wasn't televised. It was only what you heard from reporters. And all the reporters were saying was, he's guilty. He did it. Look, the body's right there where he was fishing. And he's in love with Amber Frye and wants to be her sugar daddy and all that. And nobody asked any questions like, well, he only knew her for 34 days. How in love with her could he possibly be? And she has a kid. If he doesn't want kids, why is he getting with a woman that has a kid? That doesn't make any sense. Nobody's asking those questions. So that's pretty much the trial of Scott Peterson. What happens next is why we're doing this podcast to begin with. When you're convicted of a capital crime, meaning the death penalty, what happens is you get an automatic appeal, and there's something called something having to do with habeas corpus. It's a legal term. And basically what happens is a team of lawyers goes through your trial, like all the documents of your case, page by page, and reviews it to make sure that it's a true verdict, because you don't want to be sending people to death if they're innocent. You need to make sure. That's why it takes so long for people to get put to death, because there's thousands and thousands of documents in this case. It's staggering. Over 100 boxes of files and everything. And they have to go through these one by one before you can even consider putting him to death. Now, it's California, so he's never getting put to death. I don't even know why they have the death penalty in California. They might as well just get rid of it. Nobody gets put to death in California, so whatever. But anyways, they still got to go through all these documents. So they start going through these documents. They put in the appeal. One of the appeals has to do with the judge. In the case, they cite jury misconduct, but not jury misconduct. It's more like the judge was not handling the jury properly, because what they said was he was dismissing people who said they were against the death penalty. Well, you can't do that without at least asking a follow-up question, which is, even though you are against the death penalty, could you apply the law as it is in this case for the death penalty? If there is a consensus that there's a death penalty, could you go along with it, basically? You at least have to ask that question before you just outright dismiss a juror and say, sorry, you're out of here because you're not pro-death penalty. We go back to when we've discussed some of this. They also said that some of the state's evidence that they presented in the trial was total bull. Tremble the scent dog, to me, is what? How do you smell something that's never been touched by that person?
Not to mention, I just don't understand why you would allow a dog who's failed their certification, but you're not going to allow the boat that has been tested multiple times
on film.
You can see that nothing is changing it. Like, they're just going out there with this dummy, trying to put the dummy over the boat, and it's just falling over every single time. The boat is tipping, it's sinking. You know, I don't understand how you allow one thing but don't allow the other.
Well, that's why they appealed it. Because you have the hydrologist. That's this hydrologist that testified that basically says, if you drop a body here, the tides and currents and waves will make it end up over here, which is where Scott was fishing and where the body was found. And they're like, what's your credential? Like, I don't know how they didn't catch this at the time. They tried to like bring in their own expert or whatever. But after the fact, they're like, they went and talked to this guy and they asked him, like, what's your credentials to be a hydrologist and talk about the movement of bodies, dead bodies in water? And he's like, oh, I don't have any. I was just making it up as I went along, is basically what he said.
Oh my gosh. It's just so crazy. Like,
right. And they did appeal. They also appealed that boat experiment. They said this should have been allowed.
As it should have. Yeah, it should have.
Yeah, you can agree or disagree on that. Because to me, but they said that was part of the appeal, was we should have been allowed to put this boat evidence. And like I said, like you said, when you see it, it's pretty compelling. Like, you're like, well, shit, they can't get this weight and anchors into the water without sinking this boat every time. But anyway, so then there's this thing that's it's the habeas thing. So you put in an appeal and you also do this habeas thing where you look through all the evidence, documents, and blah, blah, blah. First of all, one of the things they put in on the habeas is that they released Scott's alibi. They told the ever-loving world where Scott was that day. Another thing they put on the habeas is Connor's body was found with some sort of twine around his neck and around his chest. And there was tape, black electrical tape, on his ear, sticking to his ear. How did those things get attached to him in that body of water? You know what I mean? That seems really odd to have something around his neck and chest, like twine or tape or whatever it was. The way he was found was strange.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how sticky electrical tape is once it's been wet, but if it's been in the ocean and he happened to have came out of his mother's body through a coffin birth and was floating around in the ocean, how he got electrical tape on his ear, twine on around his neck and around his chest. I could see the twine wrapping around him as he's floating in the ocean, but how he has electrical tape that's not going to be sticky if it's been sitting in the ocean.
Right. It suggests that he was handled outside of her body for a period of time. That's all it suggests. I don't know how long that period of time is, but it's pretty odd. But anyway, so next we have Modesto itself, right? The press overwhelmingly described Modesto as this sleepy little California town. It's not. I forget what the saying is. It's like health, blah, 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 something. Well, a bail bondsman, they interviewed a bail bondsman, and he said Modesto's slogan should be murder, meth, and auto theft. like where Lacey and Scott lived was nice, but not very far away were some bad things going on. Drugs, murders, all of it. So whenever the press would describe Modesto as this sleepy little town, that's a lie. It wasn't. There's tons of crime in Modesto.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, I feel like that's for any town, really, when you think about it. You've got your nice upscale neighborhoods, but not too far down the road, you're going to have the people that are sleeping on the streets and doing crack and, like, meth and whatever drug they can get their hand on. And, whether it's a couple of miles, I know in Columbus, you've got Upper Arlington, upscale, beautiful houses. Doctors, lawyers live there. 15 minutes down the road, you've got the hilltop, and these houses are almost, like, demolished. It's
Upper Arlington is surrounded by crap all around it. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Arlington is a great place to live, but you take one step out of Upper Arlington, and you could be in some trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that, yes. And this brings us to this one for me was the wait, what? What did you just say? Moment is between 1999 and 2002, 7 pregnant women went missing in an 80-mile radius around Modesto. But 3 of the women were in Modesto. One was Lacey Peterson, and then there was another one named Evelyn Hernandez. Evelyn Hernandez was found in the bay. Her head, arms, and feet had been removed, and the baby was never found. And this happened exactly 6 months after Lacey Peterson went missing. Well, that looks like a pattern to me, doesn't it? I mean, that Scott Peterson sure as hell didn't murder Evelyn Hernandez because he was already in jail.
I think this part of the case is what really pushed me to think, because it is strikingly similar in whether or not whoever murdered these women, these pregnant women, what they wanted, obviously maybe a baby, and that's why Connor was discarded the way he was. I don't know. This definitely is a turning point for sure.
Well, the thing is, it got dismissed because it got related into, or it got kind of partnered with, that these are satanic worshipers that may have done this. Like, they were like, well, maybe these satanic worshipers kidnapped Lacey because, and people were like, yeah, give me a break. And even me, I'm like, it doesn't have to be satanic worshipers. It could just be a group of people, like you just said, that want a baby. And they tried to get one, and something didn't work with Lacey, and they ended up, Connor died. And the next time they tried it, they ended up that they got the baby they wanted. I don't know, but it's just weird that you would find a woman almost in the exact same conditions as Lacey in the exact same place 6 months apart. That's strange. I mean, it's certainly something you have to look into. The police never even thought for a second to even investigate something or someone other than Scott. All right. So next we have these eyewitnesses. We've got a handful of eyewitnesses who say they saw Lacey after 10:18, which is when the neighbor, Karen Service, put Mackenzie back in the yard. And it's the sightings are like, if you look at them on a map, it's like a circle. They go from Lacey's house out to the park and then back around and then back. We'll put a picture up here so you can see it. And it's just kind of a semicircle out and then back to her house. And so logically, it makes sense that people were seeing her. And most of the witnesses said, yeah, I saw her, but I wasn't paying that close of attention. There was a woman. She looked pregnant. She had on a white shirt and black leggings, and she was walking that breed of dog. But like I said, this kind of gets dismissed because, and Garagos explains it, and I still don't really totally understand his explanation but for not calling these witnesses. But he basically says, well, I had already proved that she was alive on the 24th. So the prosecution's theory of the case was destroyed. I had destroyed it already. So I didn't think calling these witnesses would do any good. But in hindsight, here's what happened. They got to scan these documents in, right? Into computers or whatever. Documents. Well, there's thousands and thousands and thousands. Well, sometimes 2 pages get scanned in at once, and so it gets missed. These lawyers, that's why they go through it physically, page by page by page, Why it takes years and years and years? Because they have to do it this way because they need to make sure they didn't miss anything. Well, they did miss something huge. It's the mailman. His name is Russell Graybill. He's the Peterson's mail carrier. He said, I delivered their mail between 10:30 and 10:50. He knows this because he has to scan some of the stuff that he's delivering, like stuff that has like a barcode on it or whatever. And so he knows where he was. This 10:18 timeline that is pretty solid by Karen's service, but it's not totally exact because they kind of rebuilt it by receipts of hers and this, and she was doing this at this time. And so they narrowed it down to this 10:18. So they're like, well, anything that happened after 10:18, they're not looking at it as a priority. Anyone who says they saw her, it's mistaken identity, blah, blah, blah. Well, this Graybill says, I was at their house between 10:30 and 10:50. The gate was open and Mackenzie was not barking at me. She barks at me every day. Every day that I drop off something at their house, if she's home, she barks at me. Well, this is huge because this completely obliterates Karen Service's thing. She very well could have put Mackenzie into the backyard with her leash on her, and then Lacey comes out after 10:18 and goes for her walk. And that's why Mackenzie's not there. So that puts all of those eyewitnesses into play. And here's the key to this. Even if one of those eyewitnesses saw Lacey Peterson, Scott Peterson's innocent, completely innocent. That's staggering to think about when you think about it. Look, you got this guy, Tony Frietes. He says he saw Lacey walking the dog. A guy named Frank Aguilar was driving down Maloma Avenue, says he saw a pregnant woman walking a dog. Homer and Sue Maldonado are witnesses who say they saw a woman walking a dog between 9:50 and 10 o'clock. And then Diane Campos was smoking out behind her job, but her view was a little bit restricted. I thought from what I saw, there were some trees there, but she says she saw a pregnant woman walking a dog, white top, black pants. So, I mean, there's not just one, there's several eyewitnesses that say they saw this woman. And there's a man, I can't seem to remember his name, and he says he saw into Scott's boat and said he didn't see a body in there, no tarp or anything like that. Garagos was going to call him as a witness. He had plans to go to like Barbados or something on vacation, and Garagos told him, don't worry about it, we won't need you. Why he told him that, I have no idea. But that's another witness. So there's many witnesses that say they saw a woman walking the dog. And like we said, if even one of those is right, then he's innocent. The next, we got to talk about the Medinas. That's the people that live across the street from Scott and Lacey. There's a woman, she calls on the 24th. She calls the police department and says, there's a burglary taking place on this street that they live on. There's people and they've got a van. There's 3 people. One of them's got a safe sitting in the front yard because, I don't know, it's too heavy for them to carry all the way out or whatever. But there's a burglary in progress and you need to come check it out. They eventually solve this burglary. It's Glenn Pierce and Stephen Todd. They arrest for this robbery, and they say that it did not occur on the 24th. This happened on the 26th. That's what the police say. Well, that's not. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in the first podcast. That's not true, because if this had occurred on the 26th, at least 10 reporters, eyewitnesses would have seen this going on, because by the morning of the 26th, there was TV vans lining the street up and down the Scott and Lacey's house, and they would have been seen. So there's no way that this happened on the 26th. It happened on the 24th. And he's a watch commander at a prison, and he says this there's an inmate at the prison that's talking to his brother, and it's being recorded or whatever, and he's talking about that. He says that Stephen Todd said that Lacey had confronted him. He said that pregnant lady had confronted us, and because we were telling her to shut her dog up because her dog was barking at us. And Lacey, and everybody has said this, that Lacey was not one to take guff. She was, if you yelled at her, she was going to get right back in your face and yell right back at you. And he admitted that he confronted her. And then the brother was like, man, shut up. Don't be talking about that. They could be recording us. Well, they were. And this Laponte guy, he says he took the tape of the conversation, put it in an envelope, and gave it to somebody from the Modesto Police Department. The Modesto Police Department says they never got it, and they don't. This tape has magically disappeared. Now, the thing that's a little weird to me on that one is police stations have chain of custody rules. Like, you can't just put a tape in an envelope and hand it to somebody without that person writing something down, signing something, and all this. And so that one's a little strange to me. Another one that's a little weak, but still kind of interesting is this. They have these dueling experts, right? They have the one expert for the prosecution that testified and said that Connor, he did his calculations of the bone sizes, he's measured everything, and says Connor died on the 24th. This other expert says, no, that's wrong. You did the calculations wrong. You had to measure this and this and this. And he says Connor could have lived up until the 8th of January. Okay, that's fine. Maybe. That happens in trials all the time. One expert says one thing, another expert says something else, and you have to decide which expert you believe. Our last, and I think most controversial thing that we're going to talk about as far as Scott Peterson and his case is jury misconduct. Misconduct by the jury itself. Rochelle Nice, Strawberry Shortcake, she lied on her questionnaire to get on the jury. She was asked, have you ever been in a court proceeding? Have you ever been part of a court proceeding? Have you ever been the victim of a crime? Have you ever been a witness in a legal proceeding? Was some of the questions. And she marks no to all of these, but she actually was. And she kind of plays it off. Her ex's girlfriend was harassing her, and so she sued them, or she went to court to get a restraining order or something. But it never materialized. It got dropped or whatever. And so she says, I didn't really think about it because it got dropped, and it never went anywhere. And that's fine, but you can't lie about that, though. You have to put that down and then answer the questions, whatever the follow-up questions are for that. And maybe you're still going to be qualified to be on that jury, and maybe you're not. Well, she wasn't having any of that. She definitely wanted to be on that jury because she didn't like Scott Peterson. She thought he was guilty, and she wanted on that jury. And so she omitted that. So she at least lied by omission, in my opinion, if she didn't just straight up lie. So what do you think about that? That's pretty much it. What do you think about the case? What is Scott Peterson guilty, innocent? You don't know. Because here's the thing. Eventually, a judge said, yeah, there's too much here for you to stay on death row. We're commuting that. There's no way that there's enough evidence to say you should be put to death for this. So he's off of death row now. And he's going to get a new trial. I know there's these people out there, we mentioned them at the start, that are like, F that POS, he's a jerk, he's a dirtbag, he did it, I hope he rots in hell. Well, everything you said up until I know he did it is true. He's a dirtbag, he's a jerk, he's a scumbag, he's not a nice person, he didn't act right when his wife went missing, but that's not how the law works. And he's going to get a new trial. Don't be shocked when this happens. So what do you think?
I would like to do the Casey Anthony case eventually, so I'm not going to go to... Yeah.
That's all you talk about whenever we talk about true crime is Casey Anthony.
I know, because it amuses me. And to be honest, I think that if their trials... we brought up Jose Baez, and to be honest... when we talk about Scott Peterson, I think of Casey Anthony, because Scott Peterson, if he gets a new trial, I feel like if they can get some jurors that have never heard of this, like me, would probably feel the way I feel about this. Scott Peterson is an asshole. He is not a nice person. He didn't show enough remorse for his wife. But did he kill her? I don't know. I don't know how she died. I don't know where she died. I don't know how she ended up in the bay. And there's no real evidence that I have seen or heard besides people's opinions and emotions to tell me Scott Peterson killed his wife. So I just don't know.
Because that's me. Here's my analysis. I don't know either. I'm not sure. Scott Peterson's all those things you just said. Did he kill his wife? I don't know. He might have. I can tell you this. I don't think it's for the reason that they think it's for. Amber Frye. That's ridiculous. So they can't tell me where it happened. They can't tell me exactly when it happened or how it happened. That's a problem for me. Here's the key thing, which you kind of alluded to. Do I think he got a fair trial? No, I don't. I don't think he got a fair trial, and he deserves one because it's like The People versus Larry Flint, right? I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but he was the CEO of Hustler magazine, and he got sued because he was a pornographer, and it went to the Supreme Court, and they said no, he can print his magazine because he has freedom of speech and blah blah blah, even though he's a scumbaggy guy. And to me, that's how the justice system is supposed to work. It doesn't matter who you are or what kind of person you are. You're supposed to get equal justice. So I guess that's basically it. I take it or leave it. If you've listened this far, I'm glad you did. That means you at least have an open mind about things, and you maybe are a proponent of justice and not just vengeance, which I think was a lot of people's motivation who were either involved in this case. I'm talking to you, Nancy Grace, or that just paid attention to this case. I think vengeance was more along the lines of what they were looking for as opposed to justice. So that's it. Thanks again for listening. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, especially hit that thumbs up, because that thumbs up really helps us get that big algorithm in the sky. It helps us get into there. And that's the one good thing about YouTube. So we really appreciate that. We just want to thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. We love doing this, and we appreciate it. Be blessed.